November 1st. This morning I found two huge white birds in the water outside the Great Wall. They had black beaks with yellow spots in front of their eyes. With them was a smaller bird with gray feathers. The big ones have deep voices, but the young one makes high noises. The fox said they were swans, and the smaller one must be their child. The cook was all for trying to catch one and cook it, but the fox wouldn't let him. He said that they were only trying to get home like we are. The swans live up north in the summer and come down here in the fall before the snow comes. The fox said that the storm must have forced them down here. They look a little ragged and hungry after their long journey. The grown-ups began to preen their feathers as I watched. We have so much rice left over after a meal. It's such a contrast to Tiger Rock. I can remember years when I would eat every grain. Now I took a handful of cooked rice and squeezed it into a ball. Then I went out to the Great Wall and threw it to them. It bobbed on the surface for a moment. The biggest swan sniffed it and then sampled it. The next moment, he had gobbled it down. Then he made a loud sound that made me jump. I fed them several more rice balls. Then I sat and watched them drift about the water, graceful as American sailing ships. As they glided along, I thought to myself, floating over the sea back toward home. It made me feel a little sad. November 8th. The whole camp has taken to feeding the swans. When they ran out of leftover rice, the men began to take the good rice as soon as it was cooked. When the cook complained to the fox, he ordered us to stop. He told us that if we kept feeding them, they'll be too heavy to fly out. They might even sink. They have to leave soon. At first, I was disappointed. I had wanted to watch them raise their young. However, the fox explained that the swans had only stopped here to rest. They will be headed out to Sacramento Delta. The snow is coming. I got excited about that. Finally, I'll get to see snow again. But Uncle grumbled, "You just wait. You'll wish you could leave with the swans." November 11. The swans have left. It's quite a fuss. I didn't realize how big their wings were. They must stretch more than 2 meters in length. When they flapped them, they began to splash the water. However, they rose only a little bit from the surface. Though they had their feet tucked in tight under their bodies, they dragged in the water. Finally, all three staggered up toward the sky. It's made me feel sad again. Maybe because they can go onto their home so easily, and I cannot. Or maybe it's because swans keep their families together. They don't send off the runts to die. December 5th. It has gotten cold, colder than I've ever known. To keep warm, I go to bed in my clothes and jacket. All I have to do in the morning to get dressed is put on my boots. The cold makes it hard to work. The water numbs my fingers as soon as I touch it. Every chance I get, I breathe on my fingers to keep them from getting stiff. And even though my coat would have kept me hot as a furnace in Tiger Rock, it feels as thin as paper here. Uncle says it will get even worse, but I don't see how. December 8th. It's raining, so no work today. It was so cold I stayed in my blanket this morning, rolled up like a silkworm in a cocoon. Though I don't work in the river, I'm still very busy. There are letters to write, and I have to help the fox. He's teaching me how to read and write in American, so if Blessing had come, he wouldn't have gotten out of school after all. I even try to read the American newspapers now. December 9. Still raining, but lots to do. No word from home. I hope they're all right. December 10. It's raining off and on. In one of the breaks, the fox went down to check the level of the river by the Great Wall. So far, it's still holding. December 19. It has rained now for 5 days. Though it's not raining now, the sky looks like it will soon. Something's wrong. The camp is too quiet for a Sunday. Is it robbers? I'm going outside. Later. It was Hiram and Brian. At first, I didn't recognize them as they stood on the edge of camp. They were all wrapped up in heavy coats and their faces were covered in mufflers, but they waved when they saw me. Even so, I had learned to be cautious. I hung back until they called to me and pulled the muffles away from their faces. After the last few months, I didn't know what to expect anymore. Maybe the gold had driven them just as crazy as everyone else. Brian marched into camp as friendly as ever. Hiram followed him a little shyly. They both wished me a Merry Christmas, which is a big holiday for all my friends. Christmas will come next Saturday. Brian had come up to visit Hiram. Esteban would come along later. He and his brothers had gone to church. We're all starting to feel a little self-conscious because the other miners were staring at us, so we walked over to the Great Wall. Thanks to the fox's lessons, I can understand my friends better. Brian asked about the water chains. I got on one and showed him how they operate. They both took turns pedaling. Hiram said a water wheel could operate a pump. We could get the water out more efficiently and faster. And he drew a diagram onto the ground. I'll mention it to Fox. Hiram's group, though, hasn't done well, even with the water wheel. They diverted the entire river down a channel. Diverted the entire river down a channel and then built a dam across the river. And after all the effort, they have hardly found any gold. However, they have high hopes for next year. I didn't tell them how well we've done. The Foxes said that gold likes to play funny tricks that way. He's heard of one company that's hired teams of experts called geologists. They didn't find a thing on the claim, so they abandoned it. Then some man who could neither read nor write walked over the same area and tripped over a nugget. He tried to dig it out, but he kept finding more and more of it until it turned into be a big boulder as big as him. We sat down by the river beneath the bare aspens. The ground was cold and hard, so we huddled up for warmth. There was a lot to catch up on. Brian's claim was already played out, and he has signed on with a hydraulic mining operation here. He doesn't like it much. If he had wanted to work for a company, he could have stayed at home. Esteban joined us then. He gave me a holy card, a picture of a saint called Jude. He helps people with impossible causes. Esteban said he is the perfect saint for gold miners. He and his brothers have been praying to him a lot. Brian and Hiram gave me a bunch of fresh new pencils, and all I had for my last shipment was a stub, so they were welcome. I felt a little guilty that I didn't have anything for them, so I told them to wait a moment while I got some tea for everyone. I'm writing this now while I wait in the cook's tent. I'm going to trade them some letter writing for pieces of Chinese beef jerky. It's sweet as well as salty, so it's different from American jerky. Still later. They really like the jerky. The cook has even made some meat dumplings and other things to snack on. While we ate, we exchanged news. Esteban's having as much trouble as Hiram and Brian finding gold, so he and his brothers are thinking about trying their luck back in San Francisco. They can see that the ones who are really getting rich are the merchants, not the miners. Merchants can charge a fortune for just one egg. Brian and I agreed that we dig up the gold, but that we don't get to keep it. Most of it goes to the storekeepers for food or other things. Hiram, though, said Esteban was wrong. If the gold plays out, the store's prices have to fall back to normal. The real money is in the land. I thought of the rich fields he had passed on the riverboat. Some of them would have been perfect for rice. If he can get a big enough stake, Hiram is going to try to start a farm here. He's seen how many American miners got sick from scurvy because they don't have fresh vegetables. I asked him about his girl at home. Would she come out? If I loved someone, I don't think I'd ask her to risk this dangerous trip. Hiram grew sad. His girl has already married someone else, so he has nothing to go home to. It was strange to think of him turning his back on his homeland like that. I asked about his ancestors, but his grandparents are buried in an entirely different province, and his great-grandparents are overseas on a different continent. That was even harder to understand. My clan has been at Tiger Rock for more than 1,000 years. Many generations are buried in that soil. Even the swarms seem to have more of a homeland than Hiram. Americans are so rootless. I almost felt sorry for them. I asked them what his cousin thinks of his scheme. Although I would be sad to see Hiram go, secretly I was hoping that if his cousin left, so would some of the other bullies. Then it would be safe to travel about again. However, the gold has its hooks into Hiram's cousin. He has vowed to live and die in the gold country. Hiram looked guilty then and added that he is sorry about his cousin. He tried to tell him what I am like, but his cousin won't listen. I could see how bad Hiram felt. I told him that I understand and that I wish there were more Americans like him. He answered that most of the town feels like he does, but his cousin and his friends shout so loud they drown everyone else out. Then I had a new worry. What if his cousin knew he was here? Hiram had just told him that he was going to go for a walk. He didn't want to risk upsetting his cousin. I was asking more about this custom of Christmas when he heard a commotion into the camp. It was another American. I didn't recognize him at first. However, when I saw the slips of paper in his hand, I figured he was collecting taxes. It was too soon, though. When the fox tried to protest, the American unhooked and whip from his belt. When he shook it out, it was as long as a man and as lethal as a cobra. And when he cracked it on the ground, it threw up bits of dirt. Then it began demanding to be paid the taxes. Hiram stared at him hard. He whispered to me that the man was no tax collector. He was another miner who just lost money in a poker game with his cousin last night. He was just trying to cheat us. When Hiram started forward, I tried to stop him because the other American might complain to his cousin. But Hiram was too angry. He ran forward, waving arms and shouting in American not to pay. The bogus tax collector whirled around with a snarl. He recognized Hiram and threatened to tell his cousin. Hiram wouldn't back down. If the bogus tax collector did that, Hiram would tell the magistrate. Hiram was an American. He could testify in court. The bogus tax collector gave up then. He tried to pass it off as Christmas prank. Just a little something so he could buy some Christmas cheer. As we sat down again, I asked Hiram if the bogus tax collector might get him in trouble with his cousin. Hiram said that he was willing to take what came. Brian and Esteban both offered Hiram places to stay if his cousin throws him out. So did I. Though an icy breeze blew from the water and the tea had almost frozen, I didn't feel cold anymore. December 20. The rain stopped, so we went back to work. But it's so cold. The mud is half frozen, and it's so slippery. We've all fallen a couple of times. I've told the fox about Hiram's water wheel. He said it might work for Americans, but not for Chinese. I can't understand why a clever man like him doesn't want better machines.